All right, Coach. Welcome to Module 3 of the Varsity Edge, your blueprint to landing the head coaching job. This is Coach Coltharp again. And in Module 3, we're going to talk about the close. And, the goal of this module is to master the interview and negotiate for program success. And, once again, this is a mini course here on YouTube just to kind of give you an overview of things that you need to do to get yourself that first head coaching job. Obviously, I've written an extensive book through a lot of different research and research methodologies that I think shares a lot of great information. I'll put a link to that book. The book is titled The Varsity Edge. Just like the course, it's supposed to drop 12/12/25, but I think it may be ready a little bit earlier. So check back on that, check that link, and if you would, drop a like on the course and share it so people can, kind of see what we're putting together. So let's jump into Module 3. So you've built your systems and you've done the research, and now you have to win the room. The interview is the sales presentation, and you got to know your audience. The biggest thing about that is most interviews that I've ever been on have been very, very similar. It's going to be some kind of panel, but you have to understand all panels aren't created equal. There are people on the panel that are there to keep peace in the building, to make them think that they have some kind of decision making authority, and then there are people on the panel who really have decision making authority. One of the biggest, worst kept secrets in the history of the world is that ADs do not hire and fire football coaches; principals do. The principal is obviously going to be the number one person in the room. The AD will have, dependent on the structure of your school system, if the AD is just, a random coach on staff, they won't have as much pull as if the AD is also an administrator. I've been in several interviews where they had a person from the county central office there, whether that person was over athletics or county AD or something like that. I've had those kind of people in there before. Booster club people, I've had parents, I've had teachers, department chairs and things of that nature. And that's where the school politics kind of comes in. I've actually had student athletes in my interviews as well. So, I mean, you just kind of never know, but you have to know when you fill in the room. Um, who's who and what's what, and that goes back to what we talked about in module 2 about doing your due diligence. Had touching base with the AD before you show up to find out how many people is going to be on the interview committee, and as close as you can get to knowing who those people are. So you're gonna face this multi-panel interview, and you got to tailor your message to each of the stakeholders. Obviously, when you're talking to the principal, they have three main goals: liability, safety, and eligibility. Academics is their number one thing, making sure kids are safe and taken care of. Things as simple as, not leaving campus until the last kid's picked up, which can be kind of a headache. Making sure that you're being safe in practice and not doing crazy things, making sure everybody has the correct equipment. These are kind of things that principals care about. When you answer questions, you want to make sure that you have a structure that shows that you have these things in mind, and that you're going to, put him at his least amount of risk. And obviously principals want to win. One of the questions I always ask when they ask me is, do you have any questions for us? It's always, well, define success. How do you define if the football team is successful? That tells you a lot about where the principal's at. So, that's kind of a nugget that I would share with you on that one. ADs care about competence and maintenance. They want to know that the sport, can run a program, and that you're going to be the least amount of headaches. ADs have enough headaches as it is. I spent some time as an AD, and I promise you, dealing with cheerleaders and finding a bus for cross country on a Tuesday when the golf team has to have a bus to go somewhere, and then volleyball, the nets are broke all at the same time. Those are things that they're dealing with in the fall. The last thing they need is a major blow up in the football program. So that's kind of where they are. Your parent and community members, they're going to want to gauge how you communicate, how you define fairness. And I think this is where you come back in and you kind of reiterate your policy, not personality. policy over personality when you're doing discipline and things like that. You're going to get parent politic questions. How do you handle an angry parent demanding playing time? And that's kind of where you say, hey, look, my policy is posted publicly. Playing time decisions are based on published measurable metrics, performance and practice, attendance, and compliance with the code of conduct. If a parent has a question, I will point them back to the policy. And you can say it like that. And my always answer was is really don't discuss playing time with just a parent. If a parent wants to talk about why a kid isn't playing, they got to bring the kid into the meeting with them. You bring your son into the meeting with me, and let's let him tell you why he's not playing. And then we never talk about other people's children. We're not going to compare Johnny to Sam and these kind of things. And we're not going to talk about Sam, but we're going to talk about what Johnny's doing. What did Johnny do in the off season? What's Johnny doing in season? Why Johnny's not playing? Because Johnny can't act right in school. But Johnny's going to sit in that meeting with that parent and explain to them, why playing time is. And generally speaking, when you say, yeah, I'll meet with you and Johnny, parent usually doesn't want to meet. Behavioral questions, they require a structured answer for a first time head coach. This is how you turn assistant experiences into proof of head coach readiness. You kind of use that STAR method every time, situation, task, action, result. So in that situation and task, briefly set the scene of your responsibility. Hey, star player, was late coming, showing up for a playoff game, etc. Those kind of things. Detail the specific steps you took. Use I, not we. I referred to our written code of conduct, which states quantify the positive outcome. The player accepted the consequences and GPA improved by 0.5 points that semester. Just whatever you're dealing with. But if you use that STAR method, it usually comes out on the good end. The results show leadership, adherence to policy, and a positive impact on the student athlete. And I think that's usually a win-win for everybody. And then this last part, we're talking about negotiating for program success. They're going to offer you the job, and they'll call and offer you, and that's where you always say, well, listen, I'm super interested, but I would love to come sit down with you and talk about it in more detail. And generally speaking, that's just going to be you and the principal and maybe the AD. And this is where kind of the rubber meets the road. Now, and some of these things you can do and some of them you can't. It just depends on where you are, but it never hurts to ask, how much are the assistants paid? If it's a school-based number, always argue for more money for your assistants. Before you argue for yourself. Better paid staff means better talent, better supervision, less liability. And that also proves to the AD that your priority is program safety and excellence. I went to a place one time where they gave me there was an allocation for how much the assistants were made. And it was funny because we had a guy on the staff who had been a head coach in another state and won a bunch of games. And he was just kind of like double dipping, and he was an assistant. And he was making less assistant coach money than a kid who had graduated from the high school and was in his second year coaching. And I was like, that's crazy, but that was that Nepo money type thing. So what I did is I went in there and made everybody the same based on how many years they had. And then actually that guy became my highest paid assistant. Things like dedicated equipment budget, facility usage rights, those kind of things, they demonstrate long-term commitments. I always ask for, hey, I'd like to go to a clinic every year. Will you guys pay for it? These kind of things, and, just all the kind of things that you can kind of write down and think of. And then, after the final proposal, send a little mini proposal. Thank you. This is a Bruce note that reiterates 2 key solutions you offered. I will begin with helmet audit Monday, and my first parent meeting will be next Tuesday. This shows you are ready to work immediately. And I think that's really, really important. And now, kind of in conclusion, let's talk about what you do after you get the job. Your first 100 days. Congratulations, you're now the new head football coach. One of my mentors told me when I got my first job, he said, "Congratulations, boy, you've now enjoyed your last football practice." Oh, was he never telling the bigger truth? Your first 100 days are entirely dedicated to implementation, not to X's and O's. Your first week, you want to do finalize and onboard your staff as fast as you can get them. And there's a common misconception that, oh yeah, I'm gonna hire and fire these guys and bring, I think the most I've ever been able to bring to a new school is maybe one or two. So you're gonna have to meet with the guys who are there and quickly gauge, where they are and what their desires are and all those kind of things. And we talk more about that in the book. So if you want to go more in depth in that, pick up a copy of the book. You want to conduct a full facility and equipment safety audit. Go see how many helmets you got. Get the if you're a mid-year hire, which most of us are when we get our jobs, you want to see if reconditioning has been done. If not, you want to get that done as quickly as possible. Schedule your meet the coach night for all the parents and stakeholders. Your path is set. You're no longer the coordinator, you're the CEO. So you have to go secure that edge and give yourself the foundation for a great start.